welcome to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Thursday host, Yeka, and this week we've been talking about LGBTQ+ and the pagan community. So our question comes from JR, and they write, I am a bisexual cis female non-deist, and I was recently talking to a gay cis male friend about our beliefs. He commented that he thinks there are a disproportionate number of LGBTQ+ people who are pagan, or as he referred to me, pagan-esque. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that there are a disproportionate number of LGBTQ+ people in the pagan community, and or a disproportionate number of pagan people in the LGBTQ+ community? That's a mouthful. Why do you think this is or isn't so? And do you think that the queer pagan is a stereotype that exists? If so, what are your thoughts on the coupling of paganism with certain sexual orientations in the general public's view? So if you didn't catch some of that, that's also in the description below. So first off, starting with the first paragraph, she writes that she's a bisexual cis female non-deist. And just for some clarifications, bisexual is talking about her sexual orientation. Cis is one's part of one's gender identification. Female is a biological sexual thing, and then non-deist being a religious. All of those terms, except for cis, I think are probably going to be really familiar to most people. Cis is short for cisgendered. You might have heard it before. It's been around for a long, I don't know how long it's actually been around, but it's been around, and only in the last few years has become really a lot more known about, and a lot more used more often. So basically cisgendered, as opposed to transgendered, right, is somebody who feels comfortable in their identity, their gender identity agrees with what their biological sex is. So that's just kind of talking about some of the definitions there. And before continuing, also I wanted to talk about the LGBTQ+, which you will often see either shorter as just LGBT, or you'll see it with a lot of other letters like I, A, Q, and all of these other ones. And basically the idea of that, so LGBT, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, Q is for queer or questioning, you'll see I as in intersex, A, asexual, ally, all of these things. The idea is to try and say something that is as inclusive as possible, because it's very purposeful intentional to not say non-straight, non-cis heterosexual, because the idea is to try and be as inclusive as possible, and the language that we use has a big influence on the way that we react and interact with the world. It has a big part of what framework we see and how we understand the world. It's not the entirety, but it really influences it. So the idea is to try and use as inclusive language as possible. Sometimes that's a little bit cumbersome, so I've heard people use terms like the inclusive community or the spectrum community, which are both terms that I like. So we're getting kind of long here. The next part is, do we think that there's a disproportionate number of LGBTQ+ people in the pagan community? And it's a little bit hard to answer at first because we don't really have numbers. First off, I'm assuming the disproportionate means that the ratio is different, right? So that there's more of this group in the pagan community than there is proportionally to the human community. But the reason it's hard to answer is because it's hard to say how many people that is. How do we identify that? I've heard numbers floating around, and I don't know, I can't back them up or not, that 5 to 10% of the human population is not straight in some way. Personally, I think that it's not really like a yes or no thing. You're not either straight, bi, or gay. Like, I think that people exist on a spectrum, and that can change throughout their life and all of that. But anyways, that's not really the point of this. But without trying to really get down to the numbers of how many people are, aren't, my perception, my experience has been that there's a larger number of people from the spectrum or LGBTQ plus community in the pagan community. And the reason that I think this is that in general, now there are exceptions to all of this, of course, in general the pagan community tends to be a little bit more accepting. And I think a lot of that comes from because we are so new, and I'm not talking about that, there's some of the traditions have roots in older traditions, but that in general we're talking about the last century or so, and most people, not all, there's plenty of examples, myself and quite a few people I grew up with who were raised pagan, but most people who are pagan, in my experience, have come to paganism later on in their life. They were raised something else and then converted or adapted, changed to paganism. And so we don't have the same structure that a lot of other older religions have, that have authority figures telling people what is okay or not okay to believe. There's a lot more focus in general, there are exceptions, but in general there's a lot more focus on the individual, and people tend to be a lot more respectful of different people's choices, that it's not a bad thing to believe or to be different. And so it isn't threatening to most pagans when they run into somebody who's different from them, whatever that difference is. Whether that difference is who they like to have sex with, or how they identify in terms of their gender, or how they relate to the world, that's not threatening in the same way. I think that also, going back to that, a lot of pagans were raised in other religions. Sometimes when those religions, and we'll take Christianity, not all Christians believe that homosexuality or any other sexuality or gender identification is bad, but a lot of them do. A lot of them believe that it's a sin, and that God said this and this, and everybody should live that way. And so it's kind of hard to have to fight against that, to reconcile that belief, but say, okay, so I don't believe that, but I believe all this other stuff, so I can understand why it would be tricky to stay in a religion like that, if that's how you felt and identified, and easier to be drawn to one that doesn't care, that is like, hey, let's celebrate you and your experience the way you are. So it's getting kind of long again. And then the last paragraph asks if we think that the queer pagan stereotype is one that exists. And yeah, I do think so. I'm not sure if it's something that I'm particularly concerned about, because I think that one concern would be that people might have is that people choose the battles and the fights that they're going to have, and they could be worried that the association with the other one could weaken their position, or basically trying to make these things valid in the general public's eyes. And they're saying, okay, so if there's two things that neither of which are positive, then if they're fighting for one and they don't care about the other, they might not want these two things to be coupled because it'll hurt their cause. That's what I'm trying to say. They're worried it'll hurt their cause. Personally, I think both are great. I'm not worried about hurting a cause. I'm not out there fighting as an activist. I choose to contribute to these causes through my everyday action and through what I say and what I put up with in the circles around me and what I don't. So I don't know, I'm not too worried one way or the other, but I can see why somebody would be upset about that. I don't agree with them, but yeah. So let us know what you think below, and also we have the auditions going on. So for new substitute hosts, I'll put the link right below, but you can also just find it through the regular channel. And we would really love to hear from you if it's something that you're comfortable doing, or you know, feel like you can commit to. But I also want to say that you know, be true to what you feel comfortable with, but also I encourage some kind of stepping, if it's not too far out of your comfort zone, you know, maybe give it a try. I know that for me, I wasn't really comfortable in front of a camera when I auditioned. You know, I've been making YouTube videos, but a lot of them didn't show my face, and now I've done almost 90 videos with the Pagan Perspective, and this process has really helped me grow as a person and with my path, and become more, really explore different ideas. And I've heard a lot of other hosts express that as well. So I really encourage, if that's something that you're interested in doing, please check out the audition video and perhaps make one. So have a great week, you guys, and I'll think it's subs week next week, and see you in December.